They're watching what French voters will be deciding on April 24th, well beyond our borders. Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen serving up opposing visions of France's place on the world stage. He's for ratcheting up concerted EU sanctions against Vladimir Putin. She's against any oil or gas embargo. The incumbent backs banding together on defense and military. His far-right rival wants France to quit NATO's integrated military command. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, who's the right candidate for this moment? It's cost of living, not foreign policy, that's top of voters' minds. But those price hikes aren't happening in a vacuum. What lessons drawn from the global scramble unfolding for goods and raw materials and the overdependence on Russian oil and gas? Is France better off bargaining on its own or as part of a broader EU on energy, healthcare, immigration? Today in the France 24 debate, two candidates that are a world apart. Joining us, French member of Parliament Anne Gente from Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche party. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening.
Bruno Gollnisch, former member of the European Parliament for Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening as well to Julien Théron, Professor of International Security Studies at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Nice to see you.
Hi.
And while the French campaign, the fate of another European country is in the balance. Joining us from Kyiv, Peter Zalmayev, Director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Thank you for joining us.
Greetings.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. So, one day after Emmanuel Macron accused his rival of having a hidden agenda of quitting the EU entirely, Marine Le Pen staging a 90-minute press conference in which she spelled out her views on foreign policy. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Marine Le Pen's professed admiration for Russian President Vladimir Putin is well known. But this press conference was her chance to pitch the rest of her foreign policy. Since Russia invaded Ukraine, the far-right presidential candidate claims to have partly changed her opinion about the Russian leader. But at the Wednesday presser, she said she still backs closer ties between NATO and Moscow.
As soon as the Russia-Ukraine war is over and we have a peace treaty, I will propose a strategic rapprochement between NATO and Russia.
Le Pen added that she wants to pull out of NATO's joint military command in the name of independence and military sovereignty. She also wants to put an end to all joint military programs with Germany, citing their strategic differences. Although no longer an outright supporter of Frexit or ditching the euro, Le Pen is still critical of the constraints of EU law and favours a looser version of the Union. It's a far cry from Emmanuel Macron's openly pro-European position. The incumbent advocates for a strong EU, arguing that everything must be done to ensure that it's autonomous in terms of energy and military capabilities.
The battle we're waging is not simply a battle for France. It's a battle for Europe, because the far-right project in front of us is against the project I'm defending on behalf of many of you here. It's a hidden project, but now it's more ambiguous. But it is a project to leave Europe.
After calling NATO brain dead in 2019, Emmanuel Macron is now urging the North Atlantic Alliance to unify in the face of a war on Europe's doorstep. He's also led the charge in getting the EU to impose strict sanctions against Moscow. At a time of crisis, the president's main foreign policy pitch to voters is steady leadership.
Bruno Gollnisch, lots of points in there to go over. Let's start with Marine Le Pen's proposal for a rapprochement once the war is over between Russia and Ukraine. Is that possible if Vladimir Putin is still the president?
Well, if there is a peace treaty, yes, I suppose. But anyway, Mr. Putin will not stay in office for decades, I guess. So the problem is not the relationship with Mr. Putin. The problem is the relationship with Russia. And I don't see why we should behave differently from what we did, for example, with Germany after World War I and World War II. And now we have a good relationship with Germany, and also we want to have we have some differences, but we have a good relationship with Germany. So I hope we will have a good relationship one day with Russia, because Russia is part of our world and our civilization. And by the way, if what Jean-Marie Le Pen himself and Marine Le Pen and myself were advocated, I think maybe this war would never have happened.
And Gente?
Of course, I strongly disagree with that. You have to say here that we have two visions between Mrs. Le Pen and Mr. Macron about international relations and about the relation to Russia. Yes, indeed, we are not at war with Mr. Putin. Definitely not. With Russia, sorry. Definitely not. But Putin is clearly a problem. But I noticed that Mrs. Le Pen doesn't say a word about how we can reach a treaty. We are not talking for the moment about a treaty. We are talking about a war that was declared, and the aggressor was Mr. Putin and the Russian forces against Ukraine, and she doesn't say a word. And when you are a leader, you need also to address the problem of how you can get out of the situation where we are in now, and she doesn't say a word about it.
But first of all, she is not in charge. Second,
it's 2 weeks from now.
Second, Mr. Macron is in charge and doesn't succeed in getting peace and between Ukraine and Russia. And third, it's not Marine Le Pen who can say exactly what could be an agreement or a treaty of peace between these two countries. She has no possibility to talk on behalf of the Ukrainian government, for example, nor of the Russian government.
Julien Théron, at that press conference, Marine Le Pen saying that she now is in favor of defensive weapons shipments and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Has she changed her stance?
Yes. Yes, definitely. I remember some days where Marine Le Pen was saying that she was wanting to put France right in the middle between the US and Russia, equating on one side the American democracy and what everybody is agreeing today, even her, as the Russian dictatorship. So yes, I think that there was an adaptation of her position. Yes.
No, but it was. Excuse me, sir, but it was before. The war broke.
It's exactly
so there is no change. She from the very beginning of this war, she very clearly stated that she considered, and we all consider, that Russia led the aggression against Ukraine.
So sorry about that.
This is an adaptation.
Crystal clear.
May I add,
there is no adaptation at all.
May I add that in the European Parliament, the members of the European Parliament from her party have voted against or have abstained from voting any support to Ukraine. And this was after the war started.
Peter Zamayev, sitting in Kyiv, what was your reaction when you heard the words of Marine Le Pen?
Well, on the surface of it, you may be, excused for feeling encouraged by what you heard from someone who has received $10 million loan from a Russian bank. Mind you, this was almost immediately after Russia invaded the Crimea, and from someone who has said that she respects Vladimir Putin because he defends the interests of Russia. I'm quoting her verbatim. So obviously, we are seeing her reposition herself in order to be more competitive with her rival, President Macron. But I think what Vladimir Putin is after is not, to have European leaders pledge their fealty, their loyalty to him. He does not need that. He understands that they will not be able to win outright elections this way. What he's after with politicians like in France, which is a major component of the European Union, is someone who would gravitate away from a transatlantic unity, such as Mrs. Le Pen has agitated for all her career, someone who would consider probably splitting from NATO, weakening the European Union, and then obviously talking about how an oil and gas embargo against Russia would not be in the interests of French voters. That is precisely what Vladimir Putin is after. He doesn't care if they do or do not support sanctions against him at this point. The oil embargo is really where it hurts Vladimir Putin. And as long as she's saying that they will not support oil embargo, Vladimir Putin is very happy with it.
Yes. Well, Mr. Almayev is advocating oil and gas embargo, as far as I understand, but maybe he just forgets that Russian gas is still crossing Ukraine before arriving to Germany. And I think if there should be gas, if you want a gas embargo with Russia, it's very simple. The Ukraine has to cut gas embargo. I perfectly understand that in these terrible circumstances, the Ukrainian government cannot do so because it is one of the main resources. And secondly, about this famous loan. This loan, Mrs. Le Pen didn't get a single penny from the Russian government. This loan was much before
it's from 2014.
Russian aggression against Ukraine.
And she's still paying it back. The optics are bad. You'll agree with that. You'll agree that the optics are bad on that.
Sorry?
Loan. You'll agree that the optics are bad. It's a loan from 2014.
Yes.
And she's still paying it back today.
She's still paying back. It's not a gift. It's not a gift. And why?
But does it make her beholden to Russia? Does it make her beholden to Russia? That's the question.
No. When you are indebted to somebody, you have to fulfill your commitment and repay. She sticks on the contract with this. By the way, it was a Czech-Russian bank. But why did she had recourse to this bank? It's because because no French bank wanted to loan her a single penny, and secondly, because Mr. Macron did not fulfill his promise to have a special bank called Bank of Democracy, precisely to help the political parties to come for campaigning.
The loan was from 2014, and the Bank for Democracy, the promise was from 2017.
But this promise is not fulfilled yet. We are still waiting for this promise.
Julien Théron, is it a question of national security almost, this issue of this loan? And is it a problem? Is Bruno Gollnisch right? Is there campaign finance reform, which is perhaps a domestic issue, we're straying a little from foreign policy?
Well, it's true that she went to this bank because she was not having some money from French banks. Although we can recall as well that it was not very different in time, the position of Marine Le Pen wanting to recognize the admission of Crimea after the invasion of Russia, already a first invasion of Ukraine. Because at this time, we had this narrative that there was this referendum and so on. But Vladimir Putin himself said live on the telly that it was obviously Russian soldiers over there. So it was a first invasion of Russia. So when we speak about the war in Ukraine, we speak about 2022. It started in 2014. It's the third invasion of Ukraine. Even in Donbass, it has been said plenty of time. I have several sources, official sources, who confirmed that the Russian forces were in Donbass, conventional forces. So it's just the third episode of Russian aggression on Ukraine. 2014 was already an invasion of Russia in its neighboring country.
Well, but the fact that Crimea has been completely artificially
it has been invaded by Russian forces. Vladimir Putin said it.
Ukraine, as you may know, it's Khrushchev who gave Crimea to.
Right, but wouldn't it have been better to have first a referendum and then send soldiers?
But anyway, if Mrs. Le Pen was that much indebted to Mr. Putin, she wouldn't have condemned clearly the aggression against Ukraine.
In 2022, not in 2014.
Not in 2014.
Peter Zalmayev, again, this question of when you look at countries in Western Europe and how they view what's happened over the last 8 years in Ukraine, what's your view right now? How much has it changed?
I think this is finally a wake-up call for Western societies, for Western countries. We still have recalcitrant members the European Union, such as obviously Mr. Orban of Hungary, who is a definite outlier. Germany is still kind of wobbling. But overall, I think there is a nascent kind of understanding that Vladimir Putin, contrary to what the previous speaker said, maybe he misspoke, maybe he meant it in a different way. But when he said that Russia is part of our world, that's one thing. But to say that Russia is part of our civilization, I would probably not agree with that. Russia is definitely not a European power anymore. He has made it very clear. Trying to deal with Vladimir Putin as a reasonable kind of political actor is very, very naive. The bloody massacres that the world has seen in Borodyanka, in Bucha, has exposed to the world the very plain fact that what we're dealing with right now is a 21st century Adolf Hitler. Just because the Russians are claiming they're fighting some neo-Nazis in Ukraine does not mean that they cannot be themselves Nazis. As Churchill has said, Winston Churchill, tomorrow's fascists will be calling themselves anti-fascists. We need to understand that there's no business as usual with Russia. Russia cannot declare any sort of victory in Ukraine. It must go.
All right, you mentioned Hungary there. Eyebrows are raised when Marine Le Pen turns this time around to a Hungarian bank, MKB, to finance her campaign to the tune of 10.6 million euros. Hungary, which continues to defy EU and Council of Europe norms over rule of law, and whose prime minister received a warm message of congratulations for his April 3rd general election win. This is a tweet from Marine Le Pen where she states in it, congratulations to Viktor Orban for his landslide victory in Hungary's legislative elections. When the people vote, the people win. When answering a heckler on a campaign stop Tuesday in Strasbourg, her rival, incumbent President Emmanuel Macron, called out her warm relations with Orban.
You can cry out and even say things like, "Down with the Republic," which in my view is an absurdity. But you can do it. That's the difference between living in France and living in Hungary.
So, Anjante, do you paint Viktor Orban with the same brush as Vladimir Putin right now?
I just noticed that beyond the problem of the loans, Mrs. Le Pen just admires Mr. Putin or Mr. Orban. Both of them are men. She admires them for the fact that they are very strong in their country, very tough in their country, but also these are men who have changed their own constitutions. They have decided to reduce the freedom of speech, reduce the freedom of the press, and reduce some basic laws for freedom. So here we can see that Mrs. Le Pen admires those who reduces our own liberties or on freedom. So when she says that she wants to fight for more freedom in our country, I strongly disagree with that. She has hidden words and hidden agenda in which she says through the admiration of Mr. Putin on the one hand, of Mr. Orban on the other hand, that she will very probably she will have change very probably the French constitution, and she could be someone who could reduce also, and she has mentioned yesterday about the press, how she could choose which press she would be talking to. This should be something against which we should all fight.
Would Marine Le Pen govern like Viktor Orban governs Hungary?
What will be sure that Marine Le Pen will defend the freedom of French people, the identity of French people, and there's no hidden agenda at all. What we have been advocating for past decades within the European Parliament is quite clear. We don't want that an European superstate imposes on us our way of life, or so-called European values. I still wonder what these values are exactly. I defend the true values of European civilization, which is the part where have been invented, very tiny part in the world, that invented the freedom and equality of nations. And we agree for cooperation among European nations. We agree for free trade between European nations, or roughly the same level of life, the same burden of taxes, the same social welfare. But we don't want unfair competition from other countries. We don't want massive immigration without being able to refuse it. It's clear. The problem between Mr. Macron, the challenge between Mr. Macron and Mrs. Le Pen, it's between globalism on one side and defense of national identity and freedom on the other.
Angente?
Okay, if I may say, we see here through your words that for Mrs. Le Pen, European is a problem. But for Mr. Macron, European is the solution. He strongly defends the fact that having a very strong and independent and sovereign Europe makes a very strong and independent and sovereign France. This is the solution and the path where we should go. This is what he has been defending for the past 5 years with quite a great success. When we see what we have reached out with the vaccine that we have purchased together, the anti-COVID vaccines, with the fact that now Europe has decided within a couple of days to have grant and loans for the plan for the recovery plan. After the COVID situation, and now through the defense, the European defense, which is something he has been talking about since 2018, and many European countries were quite reluctant to this. And now through the war in Ukraine, we have understood that European defense, together with the NATO alliance, is the solution to have an independence.
Peter Zamayev, Ukraine knocking on the door vociferously to join the European Union. Is it only about protection from Russia?
Well, it's not just protection about Russia. It's encouraging a country that has really set, I think, has set an example for Europeans what it means to want to be a European. I think there's been a little slackening of enthusiasm over the common European project on the part of Europeans themselves. Ukraine has been showing by example, by spilling its blood, that it wants to be a part of the Western civilization. It is going to be an immense, I think, a step of immense, symbolism right now for the European Union to welcome Ukraine as a member. The first step has already been made. Ukraine has been welcomed as a candidate. I think it sends a very strong signal, not just to Ukrainians, but to the Russians. And that's why I think Vladimir Putin resents Ukraine. It's because he knows
sorry, Peter,
sooner or later, Ukraine will join Europe and will gravitate away from Russia.
So we heard Bruno Gollnisch express his definition of what a European civilization is, nations that are equal amongst each other. What's your definition of European civilization?
My definition of European civilization is obviously rule of law. It is, the ability of, each individual to choose his or her, way of life. Is a freedom of assembly. It's a freedom to worship whatever, God you want to worship, something that Russia, and a freedom, obviously, to express your opinion, something we see less and less and less of in Ukraine, in Russia, I'm sorry. Let me just end by saying, by sending a cautionary kind of a signal, a cautionary tale, which is Turkey. By playing around with Turkey for so long, the European Union, by promising its membership and then sort of not denying it membership, look where it's got. Turkey has become ever more authoritarian. And so you have to be, I think Europeans have to be very, very careful not to repeat that, precedent. Ukraine now is setting the trend, as you know, in the world. It has probably the world's strongest army as far as the will to fight. I think Europe wants Ukraine as a member.
Julien Théron?
Yes, well, I think that the Europeans absolutely know what is the European Union, precisely because they fought for it. This is actually the only country where there has been a pro-EU revolution in 2013-14 with the Euromaidan. As you might remember, the whole story of what is happening to Ukraine is actually coming from the project of the Ukrainian president aligned on Moscow, wanting not to have any more relations with the EU, but to join the Eurasian Economic Union, which was just created by Vladimir Putin. The population demonstrated against this project. It became extremely violent with the Berkut and Oman, the security forces over there, and even the president at the end made a shot on the people. When in Moscow they said, oh, look, it's the CIA to accuse Russia of doing so. The President Yanukovych fled since then to Russia, and the Ukrainians wanted to go toward Europe. That's what happened. And that's why Vladimir Putin started his whole campaign against a country, because Ukraine is not Russia, but it's very close. And Vladimir Putin has... he criticized corruption in Ukraine, but the corruption rate in Russia is worse than in Ukraine. And the development index in Russia is worse than in the EU. You live 10 years less in Russia than in the EU. And the Ukrainians are absolutely knowledgeable of that. And they fought for that. They have the intention to go on the West because it's basically the interest. Our guest spoke about, indeed, the rule of law, anti-corruption, guarantees of democracy, horizontal powers, freedom of the press, and that does not exist in Russia. And Russia's interest is just to dominate Ukraine as it dominates Russia itself. And that's the Kremlin's project. Ukrainians don't want to be free among equal precisely inside the EU.
Bruno Gollnisch?
Well, I do not involve in Ukrainian politics unless the sympathy I expressed for the Ukrainian people because of the suffering from the Russian aggression. But it seems to me that either right or wrong, I will not decide it myself. Maidan events were a coup d'etat against an elected president.
That's what saved Vladimir Putin.
Sorry?
That's the narrative of Vladimir Putin.
No. It's a matter of fact. There was an elected president that has been chased.
Ukrainian people. They will say the same thing.
But you decide.
I don't decide.
You
I just
decide.
listen to them. I listen to Ukrainian people. I was in Ukraine last
What is
July.
the will of Ukrainian people? The fact that the president.
I was in Ukraine last July.
The fact is that the president that had been kicked out had been a rightfully elected president. That's all.
Peter Zamayev?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to ask the previous colleague what he would consider the French Revolution. Was that a coup d'état? You know, there are
yes, it was. Certainly, yes.
It was a legal coup d'état, right?
Yes, it was.
It should have
and we saw the results afterwards. Yes, I agree. No, but I say right or wrong. I do not interfere. I'm not an Ukrainian myself. I have much sympathy towards Ukraine, especially now. But the fact is that Maidan events were a coup d'état against maybe a very bad president, but still an rightfully elected president.
Which, by the way,
He flew away, and they reorganized the elections because they didn't have a president anymore.
Peter Zamayev.
No, I just wanted to. Yes, the other colleague was starting to say that Mr. Yanukovych fled the country himself. There was a formula that was being worked out. He decided to flee for the exit precisely because he knew that his regime, his government, had become completely illegitimate. It was the most corrupt government in the history of Ukraine, and it was a government in the pocket of Vladimir Putin. Folks, I'm just warning you. We do not want any sort of semblance of this dependency in France. You have to be very, very careful not to elect someone who would feel beholden to Vladimir Putin.
All right, we heard earlier the incumbent French president, Emmanuel Macron, warning the voters that Marine Le Pen has a hidden project, which is to leave the European Union. She addressed that very point in her Wednesday press conference.
Frexit isn't our plan. But when the UK left the European Union, the French ruling class spoke of nationalistic and insular withdrawal and predicted catastrophe for the British. And that is not the case. But I repeat, that is not our plan. We want to reform the European Union from the inside. But the more we free ourselves from the rigidity of Brussels while staying in the EU, the more we can turn to the vast world. That's what the British have understood.
All right, so an endorsement for Brexit and effectively saying Frexit's not the plan of our party.
It has never been.
But not for now, she said.
No, it has never been.
She's certainly opening the door for it there when you hear her words.
I've been a member of European Parliament during 30 years. On behalf of my party, I delivered maybe 2,000 speeches. Our plan has never been to leave. Our plan is to reform European Union, to stick on what should have been kept as the basis of European Union, that is cooperation between European nations, not unfair competition with products manufactured in conditions of slavery by people in the third world or things like that. Keeping our legal system, our values, deciding on how many extra European aliens we will admit or not in our country. This is nothing against true European cooperation.
Angente?
This is only against globalism.
The first point is that you cannot decide on your own to reform Europe with 26 members who are against what you have decided. That's my first point. My second point is that all what she says in her project is in absolute contradiction with the norms, the values, the principle of what has been built for
Which
Europe.
norms? Which values?
Which norms? When
Which
you
norms?
talk about just having the French law above the European law, which is what is in her project, it means that you step out of the European Treaty. It means that you step out of the European Treaty. When you decide that French law should be above the European law, you step out of the European Treaty. I'm so sorry to say so. When she decides that the jus soli, the rule to become a French citizen, should be abolished, this is against European treaties. When she says that the right of asylum should be abandoned, this is against European treaty. So all what she says is in total contradiction with the European Treaty, which means that she has decided this is her hidden project to step out of the European Treaty. I'm so sorry to say, that's the reality.
You said that there couldn't be any, unilateral, can you say that in English, reform of the... But you just, for example, you just praised the recovery plan recovery plan that has been decided by the European Bank.
27 members altogether.
Yes, is completely against the clear disposal of the Treaty of Maastricht. No more, I remind you.
Does it mean that you're against the 40 billion that France has gained for its own recovery plan? Are you against that?
No more than 3%.
To save our companies? To save employment?
Sorry,
Are you against that?
No more than 3% deficit. And we see that because of the situation, the Maastricht Treaty...
But she was the first one to be against this 3% deficit.
Sorry?
She was the first one to say that prior to this, for the previous presidential election, she said, I want to step out of this 3% maximum of deficit.
Yes, and she was right. Yes, she was right. It was proved because finally... So
you mean that you're against what has been decided that has saved our companies, has saved our employments?
No, but the recovery plan, as you perfectly know, I hope, that is more costly for us than it's more costly for us for France. So we could perfectly have done it by ourselves. But anyway, yes, you're right. Marine Le Pen was against the 3% number of Maastricht Treaty, and it doesn't exist anymore. So this is a proof that it's possible to change Europe.
And that brings us to the broader question. We heard at her press conference take shots at Germany, take shots at the United States and China. She even talked about a Sino-Californian alliance when it comes to the internet. My question is, can France go it alone? That is to say, can France go it alone without...
We agree with cooperation with Germany, but we do not...
How much does France weigh on the world stage?
We do not need to stick on Germany policy. We are an independent nation. We can have a different opinion about, for example, dependence of the fact that Germany completely depends.
Do we stick to German policy at the moment regarding energy? Has you seen that Germany has changed its mind about energy?
Yes.
So you see that we don't stick to German policy, and German is on the contrary, just changing its mind and understands now that yes, the energy situation needs that they change their mind. Also on defense, they have changed also. So we don't stick to German policy at all.
We think that it's perfectly the right of Germany to change.
And that's the leadership of Macron. Because Macron was there, his leadership has helped Germany change its mind.
To change its policy, but and
thanks to Mr. Macron.
Thanks
to his leadership.
let me answer you. What you say, otherwise the debate will be more and more difficult. We recognize the right of Germany to change its energy policy, which was absolutely disastrous, by the way. Disastrous for us, because when Germany gave up atomic nuclear energy, it had to have recourse to coal, massively coal, with increasing pollution, for example.
All right, let me bring in Peter Zalmayev.
And buying, by the way, our electricity.
Peter Zalmayev, what's more in Ukraine's interest? That the EU 27, because right now there is horse trading going on over weaning the EU off of Russian oil and gas. The embargo on Russian oil has not happened yet. The end of the dependence on Russian gas is going to take
because of Germany,
is going to take a long time. Some countries are much more dependent on Russian gas than others. What's more in Ukraine's interest? That we continue this bargaining process, get to the point where all 27 can say to Russia, no, thank you, we don't want to buy any more of your oil and gas, or that piecemeal, each country goes at it one by one?
It has to be a coordinated policy. First of all, because as Viktor Orban has shown, Hungary is not going to play by the rules. And Hungary has acted as the spoiler, both within the European Union and NATO. NATO rules by consensus. So this also has to be something that will have to be decided, sooner or later, how to deal with spoilers such as Hungary. And Poland has been such up until the situation in Ukraine. And all of a sudden, Poland has realized that this is a call of duty, folks. Russia is receiving over $1 billion every day from the Europeans for its oil. I know it's going to be, I don't have clear answers how it will be done. Efforts are being made. Allies are being recruited. Qatar has been brought on board. Biden is rallying, various countries, including Venezuela, to try to help out. Once again, I believe that Russia has presented a clear existential threat to Europe, to the European Union, to the Western civilization. So Europe must come up, the West must come up with a coordinated plan to try to hurt it where it hurts the most.
Julien Théron, when you look at the two candidates' policies, this question of energy independence is going to be obviously key.
Yes, it's a key for the continent as well as defense matters, and actually for once we actually talk about strategic matters which are usually put off the table for more internal issues. So at least we have.
Do you feel as though in this campaign that
yes,
they're talking more about foreign policy and about defense?
Yes, definitely. I don't know if you remember, but like 5 years ago it was just like foreign policies at the end of the debates, at the very end, like few ideas at the very end. But there's a reason for that. It's because there's war in Europe. And we are talking about war because what we are talking about the gas is, should we actually fuel the war machine of Vladimir Putin or not? That's the question. The same for NATO. It's about our defensive alliance, and that's a key. So actually we are addressing these two issues. And yes, the two candidates have quite different projects about that.
All right, the result of Sunday's first round, drawing an unusually blunt reaction from Luxembourg's top diplomat.
I hope that we will not have Marine Le Pen in the European Union as the French president, as it would not only be a break away from the core values of the EU, it would also totally change its course. The French need to prevent this. This is the most important thing, in my view.
Luxembourg's a small country, Angente. It borders the Rust Belt part of northeastern France there, where there are a lot of Marine Le Pen voters. Do statements like that help or hurt Emmanuel Macron?
You mean
the foreign minister of another state
we can
clearly calling.
We can see here that actually many European countries are just calling on Mr. Macron's leadership. They recognize his leadership clearly. And as I said earlier, his leadership was clearly seen through what he said in 2018 about the European defense. And he was the first one. And again, many countries did not really understood the meaning, the deep meaning of that. When we were talking about, I mean that Europe now, through Mr. Macron's leadership, has moved from an economic entity to a political and geopolitical entity, which is quite different. And this is what we were expecting and waiting for such a long time. So this is really at stake now. And I think many European leaders have understood how Mr. Macron was an asset to the European Union, to the strength of European Union and the independence and sovereignty of European Union, and hence of France too.
But is it more, as Julien Théron was just implying, down to the fact that Vladimir Putin has managed to create European unity and NATO unity? Remember, this is the same Emmanuel Macron that called NATO brain dead back in 2019.
That's one of the mistakes he made, yes, certainly, yes.
Why is it a mistake? A strong European Union, is it a mistake?
No, it's a mistake by Vladimir Putin, is what you're saying.
Mistake of Vladimir Putin, according to what was his purpose.
So he wanted to divide Europe, so he has made Europe stronger. You think it's a bad thing?
But you know, I've been knowing European Union for quite a long time, and the European Union was first, for example, to put in common coal and iron. In France, we have no more. The result, there's no more coal, no more iron.
But I want to stay on this.
It was please, let me complete. Yes,
just because we're running short on time.
Yes. But no more coal, no more iron. It was also for cooperation on nuclear energy. There is no more nuclear energy community. The Germans decided to give up nuclear power. So
don't talk about the past. Talk about the future.
So, and we lost half of our industry as the crisis revealed. Half of our industrial potential in 20 years. Is this the result? Do you think that
the
European people wanted?
Is that the EU's fault?
So, and about the Luxembourg minister, but it's obvious that all Euro-globalist leaders will advocate the candidacy of Mr. Macron. No problem about that.
So France is the biggest military power inside of the European Union. Yes. It's the sole nuclear power inside of the European Union. Why leave the integrated command of NATO and lose a seat at the table?
Just because in fact NATO is completely under control of the United States of America, and we don't want to be involved, for example, in some. For example, we disagreed with the aggression against Serbia in the Kosovo, because nobody is talking about that. But I think one of the explanations of the attitude of Mr. Putin that he remembers Kosovo.
Yeah, it was to stop an ethnic operation of a dictator. So I hardly understand the comparison with a democratic Ukraine being invaded 3 times.
Yeah, so we had an aggression of 72 years, 2 days bombing against Serbia, and they remember it. What about Libya? The situation in Libya is completely chaotic because outside. And
it would have been better if France had been outside of NATO?
What has been decided that by European United Nations organizations, we overpassed the mandate we have received, and now Libya is completely chaotic.
We're almost out of
time. It was a civil war before.
We're almost out of time. Peter Zalmaev, when you look ahead to this French election and the fact that, we've been focusing more on domestic matters, what's your view as you look ahead to that April 24th runoff?
Well, once again, I just want to refer back to the words of Marine Le Pen when she said that we do not want the oil and gas embargo against Russia to hurt our consumers. Once again, this is a short-term fix. Continuing to rely on Russian gas will eventually come back to hurt you at home. Vladimir Putin will not stop at Ukraine. He will continue creating misery with increasingly larger areas, Moldova, the Baltic states. This will increase the the outflow of refugees to European countries increase the burden on welfare states, including France's. So it's very short to say that once again. And I think France needs to wake up to the reality of who Vladimir Putin is.
We'll leave it there, unfortunately. Much more to talk about, and there's much more coverage on our website, france24.com. Peter Zalmaev in Kyiv, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank as well Anne Gente, Bruno Gollnisch, and Julien Théron for being with us here in the France 24 debate.